I know too many of you have to be looking at me like I'm Dick Stockdale tonight and wondering who am I and why am I here. But what an honor to be a part of the LBJ Foundation and have the opportunity to have this conversation with you. I'd like to start in the video that we just saw. Madam Speaker, you talked about your passion for public service, and you talked about meeting LBJ as a very young woman, as a student, but I know you've had a long familial history with the Johnsons. Would you share that with us?
Well, I'll tell you a couple of stories because my father served in the Kennedy Johnson administration, and during that time, Mrs. Johnson would invite the spouses of some of the appointees to the Johnson home. And I remember one time, Luci and Lynda, I saw them, they were younger, but I saw it along the way when they were teenagers. And then I went with my mother to one of these. I was in school in Washington. I went with her to one, and Lady Bird was just as gracious a lady. Anyone who knew her knows how radiant she was with her graciousness and the beauty that she wanted to make that she spread throughout America were all in her debt. But at this time when I went with my mother, she said something that for some reason I just never forgot. She said, one of the challenges that I face it was that, I'll be in Texas and I'll be in Washington and I'll say I'm going to wear this dress, and all of a sudden I find out that the belt is in Texas. And now I find myself in the same situation. Another story I want to tell you about my family connection. I haven't even told this to Luci and Lynda over time because it's fresh in my mind. My brother, young Tommy D'Alessandro, passed away last week. He was Mayor Young Tommy. My father was Big Tommy. But anyway, in 1964, Ron, he went over. He was president of the city council in Baltimore. He went over with the governor, then Governor Chaws, who was probably twice his age because Tommy's like early 30s, and they go to see Lyndon Johnson in the White House to talk about the presidential election and the race that was going to be held in Maryland coming up. They go to the Oval Office, and those of you who are familiar with it know this better than I would have. He said it wasn't like you go to the Oval Office now and you're in there with the president. There were all kinds of activity. In this corner, people were doing this. Over here, people were doing that. And we went over to the desk where we spoke to the president with all this hum going on in the room. Everybody busy and buzzing and doing the president's will, no doubt. And so the governor gives this big glowing, Stenny would know, big glowing report about how things were great in Maryland, and the president was just going to sweep the state, and it was all great. Well, this was 1964, and this was George Wallace coming in with a poisonous message of anti-civil rights and seeing that on the horizon, making a big pitch for that. And it was, in certain parts of Maryland, it had a resonance, sad to say. So after Governor Chaws made his presentation, my brother Tommy, who was then the president of city council, young, he says, Mr. President, with all due respect to the governor, that's not the way I see it. You have big problems in Maryland. George Wallace is on the move. This anti-civil rights thing is sadly having a resonance. It's horrible, terrible, but we really have to have a very strong campaign to prevail. And he goes on and on and on. And Lyndon Johnson says, Tommy, I don't want any crybabies around here. Does that sound familiar to any of you? I don't want any crybabies around here. Just tell me what you want me to do. And Tommy did, and the president made his own adjustments to it. And then they did win Maryland, 52-42, something like that, which was a fight because he was the president of the United States. But that threat was there, and Tommy could see it. But we always laughed over time saying, imagine the President of the United States saying to him, we don't want any crybabies around here. I'm going to have to use that line sometime.
Well, I think that I'm reasonably certain that Tom Johnson and Lloyd Hand could tell you that might have been one of the most gentlest things that LBJ ever said to anyone. But I find what an interesting contrast listening to your words and those of President Johnson, and now having you reference that poisonous rhetoric and spirit of George Wallace versus what some people feel is the verbal sewage that comes out of the president's Twitter account every day. And in the earlier video we saw about the LBJ school, the one thing that resonates with us is the spirit of young people, but what would you say to those young people that feel the toxicity around politics, the poison that's seeping into our discourse? What would you say to encourage them to consider public service?
Well, obviously the need is more so than ever. I know we always say these are the most challenging times. This is the most crucial election of our time. Have you ever heard that? But the fact is that for young people, just think of it, to be young, to be in college or just newly out of college or be young at this time. A future ahead of technology on the move in a way that we ain't seen nothing yet. A communication in real time to enable you to put your point across, but nonetheless menacing because of other poison that can be put in the air and on the airwaves. So I just say the opportunity is bigger than ever. Know your own power, the power of your passion, what vision you have for our country, liberty and justice for all. Big two words meaning so much. Liberty and justice for all capture so much, whether it's economic justice, social justice, environmental justice, any kind of justice, liberty, freedom, ever-expanding freedom in our country. So with that thrust and your version of what your passion is, whether it's climate, as we saw for some of the students earlier in the video, or whether it's education that Lyndon Johnson, his granddaughter Jennifer is here as a public school as a teacher, how proud he would be of that, because he spoke so movingly about what he learned from the children when he was a teacher. So whether it's climate or education or justice in every form, or world peace, whatever it is, have your vision, know your subject, have a plan on how to get it done, and as Lyndon Johnson did, connect with people by sincerely, authentically showing them that you care about them, and that's what he did. For me, to these young people, I would say, just listen to what we heard, what Larry said at the beginning, and Judy said also. We had music at the beginning in the middle of our proceedings, but at the beginning, we heard all of the things that Lyndon Johnson accomplished, and that was music to our ears as well. Because while they may have been titles of bills that would become law, they made a tremendous difference in the lives of the American people. So know your power, be yourself. The best advice I ever give anyone is be yourself, your authentic self. Lyndon Johnson was his authentic self. We agree with that. But don't agonize. Our motto is and my daughter Alexandra, who was in the film, thank you, Alexandra, she knows that in our family I always say when we're out there to win an election, we don't agonize, we organize. So make a plan, have a plan.
Well, Speaker, we're certainly celebrating you being your authentic self. You heard it alluded to tonight. There are a couple of other events that have captivated this city's attention this evening. And at least last time I checked, it was 0-0. So you all can all
So you haven't missed
relax.
anything yet.
But tomorrow, Madam Speaker, you have to engage the Congress in perhaps the most serious discussion you've ever had to undertake in your tenure, not just as Speaker in Congress, on the issue of whether or not to impeach the president and to begin that proceeding. And cynically, there are many that believe, yes, that it'll pass the House, but given what the tenor that we've heard from the leader on the other side of the aisle, that it wouldn't go anywhere, to share with us your thoughts about the necessity to move forward, and then depending on the outcome, how we go forward from there.
You want to talk about that? I thought we were having a good time listening to Ketch and Shelley and the beautiful music, and wouldn't Lyndon Johnson love that, to start off with all that music, and now we talk arts, sports, politics, and now this. Well, let me just say this, because my dear friend Ben Barnes referenced comments I made at Austin, the Texas Tribune event just a couple weeks ago. He honored me with his presence there. And by the way, Willie Nelson came too, so that was great. Here's the music, the arts, that's going to unify us. That's what brings us together, I truly believe. Yeah. So, since you asked, I wouldn't have brought it up. But let me just say this. And many elected officials or people who have been involved in public policy for a long time in this room, and some young students from the LBJ School of Public Policy. Nobody I ever knew or know goes into public life to impeach a president of the United States. This is sad for our country. It has to be done prayerfully and carefully, solemnly. It has to be done honoring the sacrifice of our founders, as I said earlier, as I was quoted as saying earlier. Our dear Mr. Barnes quoted what Benjamin Franklin said, "A republic if we can keep it." Prior to that, in the dark days of our revolution, Mr. Clyburn and I were talking about this at the table. In the dark days of the revolution, Thomas Paine said, "The times have found us." The times have found us. For them to declare independence, to fight a war, to win a war, to write our founding documents. Thank God they made them amendable so we could expand freedom over time. A republic, if we can keep it. We do believe that the times found all the people that Ben Barnes mentioned, the leaders of our country over time. And what was said earlier about Lyndon Johnson being like Abraham Lincoln, doing more for civil rights and civil liberties in our country than anyone. Times found them. But the times have found each and every one of us, each of us gathered here, because our interest in public policy, and that means our interest in the future. We do believe that there is a risk to the republic if we do not maintain what our founders put forward. 3 co-equal branches of government, separation of powers with a check and balance on each other. So we didn't have a monarchy. Our current occupant of the White House says, Article 2 says that I can do whatever I want. Well, that just isn't so, Ron, Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Mayor, so many times. That just isn't so. Article 2 doesn't say that at all. Article 2 defines the executive branch, which is to implement the laws of the Article 1, the legislative branch, and the rest. But the actions that have been taken are a challenge to our Constitution. And while I did not want to go down this path, as was said, e pluribus unum, for many one, let's stay united. Weighing the equities, the oaths that we take to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States demand that we protect and protect and support the Constitution of the United States. We have to do that. We take an oath in office to do that, and if someone is disruptive of that, beauty, genius of the Constitution, the separation of powers. Our founders did not want a monarchy. That's why they wrote the Constitution the way they did, and that's why Benjamin Franklin said what he did, if we can keep it. Well, we must keep it, and we see that as our responsibility now. Mr. Clyburn, our whip, has given me a very good report about our vote tomorrow. He's the vote counter. Thank you, Mr. Clyburn. And at that point, we will go forward to, in a transparent way, putting out how the path will be. And by the way, we give more opportunity than we were ever given in any such proceedings. But that's okay. That's okay. Now, no decision has been made to impeach the president. This is about the inquiry to continue to learn the facts, to seek the truth. And how we connect with the American people is defending our democracy for the people, sadly.
Thank you. Thank you. That was powerful, it was honest, and I think that's a message that America needs to hear. That'll be the last we talk about that. Now, you mentioned the arts and music and dance, and I have two daughters who absolutely adore you. But they did want me to ask you this. I find it fascinating that particularly a lot of young people in this country have read more perhaps than you intended into your relationship with the president based on three iconic pictures. The first, as my girls call it, the shade, the coat, popping the collar on that red coat and putting on those red shades after you left the White House. The second, as I have been taught by my girls, is simply known as the clap. And now finally and most recently is what we call the point, where you dismiss. Now, I guess somewhere in here there's a question. Are we reading too much into that? But what can you tell us about those moments and how they reflect how you've had to deal with this president?
I assume somebody's looking at pictures of these things here?
This was on my own.
Oh, you're on. Okay, so it's sort of orangish, but you want to call it red, white, and blue. Very patriotic, wouldn't you say? Let me just, before I answer that question, go back to your initial introduction of it. I do believe that the arts are such a unifying force in our country. And let us thank Tony Goldwyn, Michael Gill, and Jane Atkinson for being with us. As Luci said, none of us speaks for Lyndon Johnson, but I think he might agree, maybe not, that we like hearing our words spoken by professional actors. Somehow did I say that? Oh my gosh. So let's thank them and Ketch and Shelley for the beautiful work. Because the poet Shelley once wrote, the greatest force for moral good is imagination. Imagination. When you hear beautiful music, when you hear poetry, whatever, when you see a painting, when you see a play, we laugh, we cry, we're inspired, and forgetting all of our differences. It's unifying. And then with our imagination, we can put ourselves in other people's shoes and understand them and have that conversation that is with barriers relaxed because we've found some common ground in the arts. And thank you, Lyndon Johnson, for creating the National Institute of the Arts and National Endowment for the Arts. That was so many things that he did were so wonderful. And I thought I was going to talk about all of them, but they have been referenced. But just to associate with how he saw public policy making a difference artistically, educationally, environmentally, in so many ways that might not be considered traditional in that respect. No, I just wore what was clean those days. That was what that red coat was, and that was what that white suit was, and that was what that blue suit was. So in any event, it's a funny thing, just talking about the art picture. Look at just the picture of that, just boom, made such an impression, a visual, an optic. So again, we have to understand the world that we are in, the message that we convey, the optic, the visual part of it plays so much of a role. I wish it didn't, but it does. And so I don't know if you want me to talk about those. It would be getting us back to you know what, so probably we don't. Probably we don't. Let's move on from that address.
Well, you mentioned,
Tell your daughter I said hello, please.
I will. You mentioned a litany of legislative accomplishments from President Johnson, and you also mentioned in our previous discussion that no one runs for office to impeach a president. So I know at the heart of your, this is not about impeachment, at the heart of your service is service and doing things that will improve the life of this nation's children and families. So I want to switch gears and give you a chance to talk about the other things that you're working, and perhaps talk about those one or two accomplishments in your career that you're not only most proud of, but that you're certain are going to make a difference in the lives of generations to come.
Well, thank you very much for that, because on behalf of my colleagues, I would like to tell you what we really do most of the time, not what the press likes to talk about most of the time. First of all, let me just say how honored I am that another president, President Barack Obama, honored me with the words that he said in that film. And a lot of it focused on the Affordable Care Act, which I do consider to be my biggest legislative accomplishment. Working with Harry Reid in the Senate and President Obama in the White House, his words mean a great deal to me. And wasn't it fun to see George Bush say to start a speech at the State of the Union like no other president ever has, Madam Speaker? That was so gracious of him. Here's the thing, just, I know this is a nonpartisan, non-political event, but just as a matter of public comment, last year, in 2018, in the most gerrymandered, voter-suppressed political arena you could name or identify, the House Democrats won 40 seats to take back the majority. Just a matter of history. With the help of some in this room. What we did in that election, out of respect for our constituents and those who, when I say constituents, I don't mean supporters, I mean constituents, everyone there, was to put forth our agenda for the people. For the people, we were going to lower the cost of health care by lowering the cost of prescription drugs and preserve the pre-existing medical condition. Secondly, lower health care costs. Secondly, bigger paychecks by building the infrastructure of America in a green, resilient way. Third, lower health care, bigger paychecks, cleaner government. To end the voter suppression, reduce the role of big dark money in politics, give people confidence that their voice was as important as anyone else's. Now, on the first two, I think we have a chance with the president to perhaps lower the cost of prescription drugs. I certainly hope so. He's talked a lot about building the infrastructure, not necessarily green, but if we say resilient, maybe we can do that. And I think we could do that. Cleaner government, I don't think he's particularly interested. However, that is fundamental to our restoring confidence in the public that we are there for them. For them. I'll quote another president, and this was very, people say, oh, the elitist, this, that, and that. The patrician president of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, when he died, you all know this story, but I think it bears referencing now. And people came to train stations to see his train go by when he passed away. And they said to one crying person, "Why are you crying? Did you know President Roosevelt?" And he said, "I didn't know him, but he knew me." You all know that story. Patrician Roosevelt, Oshkosh, Bagosh, overalls, he knew me. And that is what we all have to restore, that confidence. And big, dark money is a barrier to people having confidence and removing them. So that's it. But in addition to that, In addition to that, we have sent over H.R. 1, which is the cleaner government, that we have sent over legislation to fight the climate crisis now. We've sent over legislation for gun violence prevention with their background check legislation, which is supported by 90% of the people. Equality, which is to end discrimination in the LGBTQ community, is supported, bipartisan support across the country. The support for the Promise Act to support our dreamers, and thank you, Lyndon Johnson, for being so early and courageous on immigration in our country. For women, equal pay for equal work. Raising the minimum wage, which is important to women because, say, 30 million people will get a raise, 20 million of them women. And ending our Violence Against Women Act, very important to us. It's to be renewed. For young people, again, Climate Action Now and promoting net neutrality, so we have broadband, open all, high speed, always on broadband across the country for young people and old people in business and health for every reason that to go with. And we sent a large array. So this morning, the leader on the other side, he said, Mr. McConnell, he said, I'm the Grim Reaper, which is, I don't know, is that self-deprecating or is that a compliment? I don't know. I'm the Grim Reaper, so all this is going to die over here. And then he says, and we've sent him scores of bills. I just gave you a sampling of some of our priorities. He said, they don't do anything over there except impeach. No, we have a mountain of bills on your desk over there for your consideration. So that's what we're doing. But we really do believe that the lower drug prices, our three priorities, the drug prices, the infrastructure, how we make an economy that is fair, reward success and achievement, not resented in anyone, but also make sure that it is fair in terms of the opportunity that gives people. And central to that, of course, is what Lyndon Johnson cared so much about: education, education, education. So we have an array of, my why, because I told you have to have your why, your vision. Why would you get involved in all of this? Why? My why is the 1 in 5 children in America who lives in poverty. Paul and I have raised 5 children. It just bothered me so that 1 in 5 in America went to sleep hungry at night. 1 in 5 lives in poverty in America still. We have to have a society that lifts everyone up, especially the children. I'll also tell you this, just in following up your question about, this may sound a little Lyndon Johnson-esque, you let me know. I say to people, this is not for the faint of heart. When you get into this arena, this is tough. You become a target. You got to be ready to take a punch. But you better be ready to throw a punch too. For the children. For the children.
Well, we want you to keep throwing punches. And we are so blessed that you stay true to your authentic self. And I don't know that President Johnson would be any prouder than he would be tonight, knowing that you are receiving this honor. Join me in thanking and congratulating Speaker Nancy Pelosi.